Hello everyone, my name is Oisín. I'm from a Northumberland-based consultancy called Reheat. So this is a bit about Reheat. We're a team of about 24 consultants and engineers working in the low carbon heat network space. Even though we're based in Northumberland, about 60% of our turnover, I believe, is in Scotland. What I'm here today to speak about is the Community Heat Development Programme that we delivered for Scottish Government that just finished at the end of March. I will jump into that now here with the slide up on the screen. So it was a learnings pilot programme for the Scottish Government to understand how communities can work collaboratively to decarbonise heating in their communities. So ideas came from a community group and support was offered to them through this Scottish Government learning programme to offer feasibility support to understand their projects and understand what the technical challenges are in delivering them. Obviously, everyone in the room probably knows there's a lot of challenges in delivering collaborative heat network projects, but this gave community groups who might have the expertise in particular technologies or the field itself, understanding what it is and how to undertake it. A bit about the programme there. So, pilot programme that ran for almost 3 years. Reheat delivered it, offering technical advice to the community groups, was primarily focused on heat. You could look at electricity as a complementary technology, but it had to be about decarbonising their heat source with a retrofit focus as well. So looking at existing heat sources, so essentially changing gas boilers or oil boilers or whatever it might be to some low carbon solution. So this is a slide. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but there's a lot of people in this room who supported us with delivering that programme. Just to highlight some of them, Stuart from Research Bureau over there, I spoke to you earlier, and Danny as well from Scottish Water Horizon, you supported delivering it, and many more. So we didn't work in a silo. We tried to get as many people involved in delivering this with us to be able to bring in all that expertise, because while Reheat has expertise in delivering low carbon rural heat networks, we might be the best at other aspects, so it was best to get as many voices involved and take all that information to get the best reports out for the communities. Project range, I'm going to speak about 2 in particular today to give a flavour of what they are and the challenges they face, but there was 32 projects in total across the length and breadth of Scotland. We had 1 island project, a lot obviously around the central belt as you would expect where the population density is, 1 up in Thurso as well, and then obviously around the borders. Communities could come with their own idea if they wanted, or Reheat would offer them technical advice on what might be an applicable solution for them. 10 days feasibility support if they made it to the full feasibility stage, which isn't a lot. In 10 days, what can you get other than really an options appraisal of what they might be able to do? Some community groups later in the programme, when resource wasn't going to be spent by the end of the CARES framework, were offered stage 3, which could look in at particular solutions in more detail, or bits that community group wanted to investigate more, like what were their ownership options, what are the funding routes, or wanted to know more about a particular technological solution. But yeah, looked at every kind of technology that's there of them, what they might be. So like I said, I will go through 2 examples of these projects now to highlight them. Some people may be aware of these projects already, some of the work that's happened on them, other people might not be. So the first one it's got a nice fun name, Warmly. It is a district heating scheme based in Thurso. Well, it's not a district heating scheme, it's an idea from a community group on a district heating scheme. Warmly is the part highlighted in red. It's essentially a housing estate with some light industrial use and some 3 major anchor loads. NHS Dunbar, Thurso High School and the UHI campus are all there. They all have, the big 3 there have existing biomass boilers providing heat to their facilities. The community group wanted to understand, could they expand that existing biomass infrastructure into a heat network that would cover approximately 1,000 properties in that red space. Eventually, the idea would be to spread it out across all of Thurso, but they had to start somewhere. And that initial around 1,000 properties is where they started. Katniss Voluntary Group, or the community group there, they already work in this space, offering fabric advice to the communities, offering other things like alcohol and drug awareness as well. So they're a charity group doing a lot of good work in the area and wanted to then look at decarbonisation as well. The existing houses there, obviously a lot of like 1960s built, poor quality properties, a lot with electric heating, a lot with LPG and oil. There's no gas grid in Thurso because it's the very north of Scotland. It doesn't reach that far. So they have challenges in themselves in getting fuel in the first place. A lot on direct electric heating. So that means there's a lot of people in fuel poverty in that area. So how could heating there be decarbonised collaboratively for the benefit of everyone? Another thing worth being aware of is the people who are in fuel poverty already. They're on direct electric. The teleswitch service is being switched off. So if they were already in fuel poverty, it's more likely that they will be in even higher levels of fuel poverty because they won't be able to access that cheaper overnight rate of electricity. That's just the background and context to the project. Then what we did essentially was an options appraisal for them to look at what they wanted to look at was expanding that initial biomass infrastructure to a wider network. We looked at ground source heat pumps and an ambient loop, and we looked at individual air source heat pumps as a counterfactual to a network-based solution. The community group, because of where they're located, were aware that there's a lot of wind farms around them. So they have access to cheaper electricity through wind curtailed energy. And there's brokers who work in that space who sell it to them. Anecdotally, they were told they could access this cheaper electricity for about 4 pence a kilowatt hour. Them conversations with Reheat went nowhere because the group didn't want to engage with us, but that might be an option for them to look at later down the line to access that cheaper electricity. Their preferred option, like I said, was to look at a biomass district heating scheme to expand that initial infrastructure. On the engineering side of Reheat, we design, install, and maintain existing biomass infrastructure across NHS Highland, Diageo sites. So we were aware of some of the boilers in the facility, so we'd be able to engage with the stakeholders there who own them and essentially understand their interest in what community is proposing. Some learnings around the actual engagement, because the session we're supposed to be learning is on engagement with communities. When you have portions are there of who owns what, about 40% of them are owned by housing association, 55% owner occupied and private rent. To get a community heat project up off the ground, to engage with 55% of around 500 properties individually to get sign up and agreement that they will want to connect to a district heating scheme that is nothing more than a couple of pages of feasibility report at the minute is incredibly difficult, especially somewhere as remote as Thurso, where they are very self-reliant. They don't want someone else coming in, a consultancy firm from Northumberland, telling them, oh, this will be great for you, this will work. So engagement on the ground was carried out by the community group, but it's probably at this stage the most challenging aspect of developing their project. HES as well, so Home Energy Scotland do great work there in looking at fabric stuff, and it's worth mentioning the support they offered to us in delivering this programme and the good work that they do as well. Picture is just an outline map of the initial district heating scheme and what it would look like. The energy centre is in red. It would be around 9 megawatts, I think, in scale. And it's located beside NHS Dunbar, just because that's the highest energy user and has best access. If it was to be a biomass district heating scheme, that was the best access for deliveries of wood chips, which is obviously a consideration. Because warming came to us at such an early stage, they could get that additional level of support to deliver extra feasibility work. So we gave them the options appraisal, we looked at ground source heat pumps, we looked at the biomass of individual air source heat pumps. In the community group's words, we don't want tricky electric boxes and cupboards. We want to look at biomass, so that's okay. We will do that and look at this option in a bit more detail and understand what it means for them. Oh, it has come up on one side. Yeah, so I'm skipping now. So what we could do for stage 3 then for them was to look at a bit of energy centre location, outline design, understanding what the physical design of an energy centre for our community group for a community district heating scheme at this scale would look like. We could initial first past the post kind of capital costs, energy centre costs, and network costs at a scale of almost 1,000 properties, which I think this was around 13 days of additional support they got. We still are only in the outline stages of what costs would be. This is nowhere near detailed design, so any costs you see on the table are first estimates based on first principles. We were able to engage with the local planning departments to consult with them to get their understanding and their appetite for developing the heat network in Thurso. They are happy, they are interested in it. This project has been included in their LDs as a case study of good work happening in community groups, so clearly there's buy-in there, where they would want to actually become a project partner and help delivering it. That's another case. We developed a couple of scenarios for them. So if it was only domestic customers and some light industrial that would connect to the network, what would the impact of that be without them 3 large anchor loads? It changes the capital costs a bit, not greatly when you're talking about between 11.5 and 10.5 million pounds. The IRR is a bit worse depending on how you're looking at it as well. So the initial payback on the scheme is a bit worse without them big anchor loads to act as an initial load on the network. One of the other important pieces of work we did for this was looking at the air quality impact on Thurso of installing a biomass district heating scheme. When we talk about biomass, specifically wood chip district heating, one of the first things that most people come up with, what about the air quality impacts? Because we've heard a lot in the news, or what about the environmental concerns surrounding biomass as a fuel source? Drax gives biomass an awful bad name for how they operate their system, importing wood pellets from Canada or North America. What we are proposing is locally sourced wood chip in a highly controlled and highly automated biomass boiler, which comparing apples and oranges really, if you're looking at what you see in the media around biomass. We could do an initial air quality high level impact assessment and compared to what is regulated in air quality standard regulations, this would have no negative impact on local air quality. It's likely to have a beneficial impact on air quality because you would be removing the individual point sources of fossil fuels in Thurso, so you'd be removing all the oil and LPG boilers. But we couldn't model it to that level. It's just the initial high level is biomass would have no negative impact on local air quality. And then other things that we looked at was preliminary advice around ownership options. So giving them advice on what could the ownership option be for them. Could it be wholly community owned? Unlikely, especially with the level of risk involved and the incoming heat network regulations and how would a community group be able to manage and deliver them. So more than likely they would need a council partnership or a private partnership with someone in that heat network space. The next steps for them is to kind of investigate that a bit more, look at the ownership options in greater detail and really understand the benefits and the downsides to each one and decide. Like, I can't tell them what they would prefer, but it's for the group to decide which one best suits their particular situation. They need full techno-economic assessments and more detailed heat demand as well. So project-specific learning outcomes, there's a whole list of them there, but I'm running out of time, so I'll skip through that one. Another project then is the Deanston District Heating Scheme. This is Deanston outside Stirling, looking at capturing waste heat from the local distillery to provide heat to around 240 properties. So very different kind of project, much more central in Scotland, so a little less remote and a little less access issues, but still challenging to deliver all the same because costs involved are still going to be significant. So primarily looking at capturing waste heat from the distillery to provide a district heating scheme to them properties. And what we've then looked at for them, sorry, I'm skipping through this, I'm going a bit quick. Data was provided through EST, but not all EST data is created equal apparently, so we had to ground truth some of it and had to redevelop the report after some first versions weren't right. So it's interesting when you're delivering community projects that as an outsider I can give them a report and they can look at it and say, wait a minute, you've told us there's 500 houses in Deans and there's 240 I live here. Stuff like that gets missed all the time in delivering community projects, so it's really important to have that engagement in delivering them. Luckily, they also were able to get stage 3 to look at other options to decentralize that energy solution from the distillery, because the distillery input their own energy efficiency measures that would scupper the entire project then if they were to not pump all their waste heat into the local river. Interesting that one of the major barriers with this one is the initial capital cost, because there's such a low heat density, only 240 properties. To really make this project stack up, we would probably need to include more heat, which is available across the river in another town village called Doon, but primary focus is looking at Deanston first. So I'm going to just skip on to the second last slide, I think this is. So next steps for them, they need to do some similar investigate ownership and engage with residents on preferred solution as well, because there's different options there and what they could do. Is that centralized heat capturing and network-based solution of interest, or they could be better off going at individual air source heat pumps, and obviously taking into consideration some of the retrofit aspects. So there's a load of guides, a lot of resources available from this project. It's a 3-year program with 32 projects, and Local Energy Scotland will host all these resources that are developed from it on their website. So if people want to learn about any of the projects in detail, you will be able to, or any of the guides and resources that are developed from it, they will be available to share the learnings as widely as possible. Final slide then is realising community heat. We have to decarbonise heating. I spoke at All Energy and someone asked how many of these projects will go forward. And the director of our company, Neil, said all of them, because there is no choice. These have to happen. These communities need to decarbonise in some method, and it's just about how that journey looks and when. Significant capex challenges to overcome, which isn't going to be news to anyone in the room. Funding sources are limited at the minute. I know the Scottish Government member earlier said that they were going to announce some new ones, extend Scottish Heat Network Fund potentially. But when you're developing feasibility studies for community groups and telling them there's no funding available to develop a project further, it kind of cuts the project at the needs from the get-go. So we build them up, we give them all this information, and we tell them there's nothing you can do. It's not great news. Running costs for rural heat networks are obviously a challenge. How can you compete with the current price of oil? You can't, and that's someone has a very environmental conscience. Throughout the programme, technologies evolve, new octopus tariffs come online, and so it makes heat pumps more attractive. And then community engagement and buy-in is essential. You can't force a solution on a community group. You need to be in the community, engaging with them on a daily basis, telling them the benefits and why they should want to do this, rather than just a consultant from Northumberland with an Irish accent telling them it is the right thing to do. But yeah, that is it. I whistled through all that, but it's very hard to capture everything from a 3-year program in 15 minutes. So if you want to ask more questions afterwards, please do. I love talking about it.
So if you're not aware, SOSI are a government enterprise agency. We support businesses and enterprise and communities across the Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish Borders region. We're a team of 4, headed up by Paul Woolhouse, who some of you may know as the ex-minister for Highland for connectivity and energy and what have you a number of years back. And our remit covers, well, we try to take a whole systems place-based approach. We work with businesses around process emissions. We do a lot of building decarb work. We look at macro to micro renewables, hydrogen, supply chains, inward investments, and we're very much providing advisory services to clients at the strategic level, but right down to sort of practical implementation as well. So our prospectus, a quick heads up to where this came from. Well, it probably started with colleague Anthony. Hi, Anthony. Yeah, you. a number of years ago when we were thinking about the design of the LHEAS methodology. When I was at Zero Waste Scotland, and we were trying to think about where should the heat network analysis get to. We're trying to think about the fact that the LHEAS should be some form of investment prospectus. Some LHEAS got there, some of those didn't, but I very much wanted to take what was happening across the south of Scotland and bring it together as an overall sort of documentation of the opportunity within the region. We wanted to present a number of projects across a range of scales at different readiness levels, looking at different technology types and looking at a range of different geographical contexts as well. We wanted to close the gap between what we had to offer and what developers and investors might be interested in, and what types of projects are developing on the ground, so we can start to have some meaningful conversations and can refer back to this document as we go forwards as a discussion point. I'm not going to go through this in much detail because I think a lot of you know what district heat networks are, but what I want to focus on today is the fact that we focus quite heavily, and this is probably one of the first times I've seen it in publication, but we focus quite heavily on shared heat collector networks. You might call them shared ground loops, you might call them low temperature networks, you might call them ambient networks. We call them shared heat collector from the point that shared ground loops is quite misleading. If you were to take the water from a river, for example, it's no longer a shared ground loop, but it still operates very much in the same way. So it's taking low temperature heat from the ground, in this case, in this visual, and then distributing that to properties where there's individual heat pumps to raise it up to the temperature that's required, either by the business or the homeowner or the household. In terms of advancing the literature on this, what we set out when we looked at the shared heat collectors is that we identified 7 different archetypes of what these heat collector style networks could look like. I can go through what they are shortly. They were differentiated by scale, by the types of buildings they would serve, whether they would require retrofit or whether it would be into existing buildings and new builds, and the degree of community and sort of stakeholder involvement as well. And I guess there's many instances where a network may progress, and it may be a single energy centre at a district level, or it might be a shared heat collector, but that will be down to a case-by-case basis. So why shared heat collectors? Why in the south of Scotland? Why do we want to focus on this? It's been estimated that from a technical perspective, around 80% of the UK building stock or housing stock could connect to a shared heat collector style network. And they're viable very much where the heat demand is less concentrated, so less urban dense areas, suiting better, I guess, the rural locations that we have across the south of Scotland and also many parts of Scotland as a whole, and also at the community scale as well. And to echo some colleagues at the Danish embassy that spoke at an event I was at probably half a year or so ago, rural networks are also quite attractive for a number of other reasons. There's a lot of space within rural areas, so it's you can start to harness renewables to start to reduce the operational costs. You can look at space for smaller data centres, which might be servicing a small number of high heat demand buildings there, which help to improve the coefficient performance of the network. We have a vast amount of wind available in the south of Scotland. A lot of those are going through consent or they're going through planning stages, so there's opportunities for private wire into the energy centre itself. Many of the parts of this region, so probably about 40% are off gas, are running on oil, are running on solid fuel, and that if you start to switch them over to low carbon heat from electrification, it starts to increase the economic viability for those homeowners and starts to reduce the level of fuel poverty. And also when we start to think about communities, they're quite close-knit, and when you start to look at the Scottish borders, for example, there's nice logical network boundaries dotted around the region, and it's something to build off in that sense as well. So in terms of those archetypes, I'm not going to dwell on this in much detail because of time, but I will go through them quickly. Settlement-wide, so this might cover a whole village, for example. An urban neighbourhood, so several streets. So this is quite keen on this about some of the placemaking initiatives. New developments, so whether that's housing estates, industrial or commercial scale, so we focus on some of those in our prospectus. Anchor load led, so smaller scale than district, but still led by a number of anchor loads. Lots of flats, street level, and this is the one where there's arguably quite a lot of replicability across the region and across Scotland as a whole. And through engagement, so heat source led ones as well. So we were able to include a couple of networks within the prospectus where we were taking waste heat from a large cheese factory and also from a large biomass power station. So in terms of the opportunities, I outlined 7 district heat networks, which very much built off the back of the initial LHEAS analysis, and 12 shared heat collector network opportunities, again, picking out some parts of those 7 archetypes. The work is very much at pre-feasibility and feasibility stage. So some of these have gone and worked with the Heat Network Support Unit to conduct feasibility assessments. Others were very much in terms of the budget, the commercials that we had available, it was very much pre-feasibility work. So looking at the technical outlay, looking at the scale, looking at the connections, also looking at some preliminary capital costs as well. So very much they will require further work to start to get to that business case and delivery. This is just a snapshot of the south of Scotland. The blue ones are the district heat networks. I don't think we'll find many more than that at a district scale, I'll be very honest with you. But some of them are progressing towards business case development at the moment. Some of them are putting fresh applications in for the Heat Network Support Unit to look at feasibility work. The orange, well, yellowy orange, I don't know, I can't tell. They're the ones that are the shared heat collector ones, and I should add that these were built up in partnership, so I didn't add at the beginning, I do apologise. But this work was jointly funded by Dumfries and Galloway Council, ourselves, and Scottish Borders Council. Natural Power Consultants were the partner that helped bring this all to life for us. But the ones in yellow, I think what adds legitimacy to this work is that they were built up with community groups. So Kellerholm, Crossmichael, Swinton, Smailham. We worked closely with the community groups when we were developing this work. We worked with the registered social landlords, so we reached out to them, and 3 of the networks that are set out are at registered social landlord sites. And we worked with the public sector, so some of those networks as well are built up with a public sector estate. And in the case for this, RSLs range from new build, existing gas and fuel poor area in a maisonette style setting, and blocks of flats which are on electricity at the moment. In terms of the scale, just totted all this up. This just gives you an idea of what was set out in the district-wide in terms of the scale and the estimated capital costs. I'm not going to dwell on the shared heat collector network scale because I think the point here is that with these archetypes that we've set out, it's applicable for multiple different locations around the region, but also around Scotland as a whole. And there's effectively almost an infinite amount of types of scale you can look at in terms of streets, out to urban neighbourhoods, anchor load led, etc., etc. But what we had to nail down was 12 types of examples that we could bring through and visualise for the purpose of discussion and conversations with colleagues and clients going forwards. So each network had its own sort of double-page spread, bit of a write-up about the area, a bit around some of the capital work, some of the existing industry and what have you. I'm not going to dwell on these either because of time, but this is an example of the Crossmichael one. So a number of properties with a closed loop pond mat connected into distributed heat pumps within those properties. And then one in Swinton, which we've worked with an external business partner with the council to look at an opportunity around closed boreholes on the sort of village green, and then looking at connecting a lot of historic buildings around that village green in the first instance. So as I said, each network, whether it's district or the shared heat collector ones, has a bit of a deep dive, so you can start to read about it in more detail. In terms of the outcomes, we've got an evidence base now that we can start to socialise and discuss with investors, developers, with communities. I plan to go back to the registered social landlords and say to them, well, what do we want to do about this now? Are we going to take this forwards? There's a lot of credibility behind this. We've worked it up with the councils, we've worked up with the public sector, community groups and registered social landlords. We've not just picked these out of thin air. There was a lot of backwards and forwards that colleagues at Natural Power went through, and with industry as well, to get to this position. I think it puts us ahead of the curve. I don't see anybody else at the moment looking at shared heat collectors in the way that we have and trying to sort of set out what the opportunity would be for rural parts of Scotland, which outside of the Central Belt is the vast majority of Scotland geographically. It allows us as SOCI to have a pipeline of work. We're always looking for a pipeline of projects. We've got our Borderlands work, we've got our Net Zero Accelerator Fund, there's the SITF, so that was oversubscribed this year, the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund. So the government weren't able to fund all of them, so there's a lot of projects there, and this gives us another thing that we can look at. The Scotland-wide learnings for rural areas, but when I presented a snapshot of this conference recently, colleagues from Glasgow City Council came over and said, we're always thinking about how we decarbonise our tenement properties, and this has given us some food for thought. So it's not just rural areas, but if you think about streets and tenement properties, the small shared heat collectors lend themselves quite well to that as well. We've worked very closely with the Scottish Government teams, and as I think James talked about earlier, they've kicked off the national assessment for low temperature heat networks, and they're going to use some of the archetypes as the blueprint for that. And I think Steve says a Natural Power was successful in winning that tender, and I'm on the steering group for that as well, which I'm pretty pleased with. So that's been kicked off. That'll be a really interesting piece of work to look at in terms of that national assessment. And it's also added further evidence for the Scottish Government around what their policy position would be. Because at the moment, for me, there's a gap between individual heat pumps and then there's large district networks. But what are your thoughts on the just transition and the types of buildings and the types of individuals that sit in between those? In terms of what next, well, we published this yesterday. I think Emma says you'll kindly circulate it to people here. We're planning some one-to-many events. I'm not very good at multitasking, so my next job is to sort out some one-to-many events. So you might get an invite for that. Very much talking through what you probably see here, but there'll be a lot of other people down at the local level that we want to socialise this with as well. We've also got a series of one-to-one events that we're lining up. So there's a number of energy companies and other developers and other thinkers in this space we're going to start to discuss the work with. In partnership again with both the councils and led by Scottish Borders Council, we applied for the Heat Network Support Unit. Somebody asked me at a workshop what next, and they caught me off guard really, because my brain doesn't work like that, but I started to think about what next. And for me, the logical thing was, how do you take a number of shared heat collector projects, how do you cluster them together as a single program of work, and how does that start to become attractive for developers and investors? How does it start to work with what we at SOCI might want to do as any partnership, as what the councils want to do? And I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. And it's a different way of looking at investing in the heat network. It's the idea of taking smaller projects into one larger program. So we've applied to the Heat Network Support Unit for that, and hopefully we'll find out soon if we're successful with that. Several of the projects will carry on. Crichton, Dumfries Town Centre, hopefully Stranraer will carry on towards business case development, and some of them might progress to feasibility with our continued support. And the last thing I wanted to mention was, and I'm sure a lot of you have read this, the Green Heat Finance Task Force second paper that came out. They had 3 distinct recommendations. One was around accelerating place-based demonstrator projects. One was around accelerating heat networks in general, and one was around working through the financial solutions, whether it's private, public for the social housing sector. For me, this type of work leads into all 3 of those. It's a place-based solution down at the community level. We're trying to progress heat networks as part of a solution over a net zero neighbourhood, with renewables, with data centres, with storage, with private wire connections, with wider net zero solutions that are of interest to the community. And we're trying to work with other partners like social landlords to crack what can be done within a local area, because a lot of the time they are key to unlocking decarbonisation across a number of buildings. If you want to be part of the conversation, sounds a bit cheesy, just get in touch with us or get in touch with one of the councils, Sarah or Neil. Thanks.